Peter Jennings, the longtime host of the ABC News flagship program World News Tonight, has died. He was 67 years old. The cause was lung cancer. It was just in April of this year that Jennings announced to the world that he was suffering from lung cancer. He blamed it on cigarette smoking, which he said he had stopped more than 20 years ago, but resumed in the aftermath of 2001. Jennings was a figure prominent in all the major news stories of the last 4 decades, more than 40 years at ABC, and again, more than 20 years at the helm of World News Tonight. Campbell Brown takes a look at the legacy of Peter Jennings and his life.
This is World News Tonight with Peter Jennings.
Good evening. In Washington today,
He was one of America's most recognized and respected voices. The anchor for ABC World News Tonight for 22 years, Peter Jennings brought the world to his viewers' living rooms each night.
So for the next 24 hours, we're going to try to share this extraordinary occasion with much of the rest of the world.
Peter Charles Jennings was born in Toronto in 1938. Journalism was in his genes. His father, Charles, one of Canada's top broadcasters. And while he admitted to never being a diligent student, dropping out of high school at 16, he had an enormous capacity to learn.
Good evening. I'm Leighton Lunson. I'm Peter Jennings for
ABC News took notice of the young reporter, then working at Canada's CTV network, and hired him in 1964 at 26, the youngest network anchor ever.
Peter Jennings with the news.
But the world beckoned. Jennings fell in love with the Middle East after reporting in Israel at the end of the 1967 war. He left the anchor desk, eventually setting up a bureau in Beirut in 1969, where he lived for 7 years.
Peter Jennings, ABC News, South Lebanon.
He explored the world as ABC's chief foreign correspondent, raising his profile and reputation as one of the best in the field. He secured the first interview with Iran's Ayatollah Khomeini.
Will you release the hostages and when will you release them?
And he would become Anwar Sadat's favored correspondent.
Is there, in fact, no way in which a compromise can be achieved by which somewhere here in the Sinai, Israel can have the security it requires and you can have the honor you demand?
In an interview with a newspaper reporter, he recalled the moment his success hit him as he drove down New York City's Columbus Avenue with his dad and Walter Cronkite in the back seat.
But the banks insist that all the loans were made for a fixed term. Frank? How was that, better?
After years in the field and a solid reputation to stand on, it was time to return to New York City.
This is World News Tonight with Peter Jennings.
Good evening.
In 1983, Peter Jennings was named anchor of ABC World News Tonight. Jennings' love ran deep for 2 things: his family, wife Casey Freet, and his 2 children, Elizabeth and Christopher, and for jazz. He was a huge fan and spoke lyrically of some of his favorite musicians.
There's a lot of talk, Mr. President, about you facilitating a Soviet withdrawal from Afghanistan.
Throughout his substantial career, he shared many locations and went to many hotspots with his fellow anchors and friends, CBS's Dan Rather and our own Tom Brokaw. He considered the rivalry they shared healthy and was always a gentleman.
We have had a fascinating time, which we will now share with you, exploring the soul and the character and the identity of this exceptional nation.
He grew to love his adopted country. After getting a perfect score on his citizenship test, Jennings became a citizen in 2003. He was in part inspired by the attacks on September 11th.
I checked in with my children, and they were deeply stressed, as I think young people are across the United States. And so if you're a parent, you got a kid in some other part of the country, call them up.
This past spring, struggling with a persistent bronchial ailment, Jennings' doctors ran a series of tests.
Finally receiving a brief note about change. Some of you have noticed in the last several days that I was not covering the Pope.
And on April 5th, in an emotional message to his viewers, Jennings shared with them what had only been confirmed to him days before.
I have learned in the last couple of days that I have lung cancer. Yes, I was a smoker until about 20 years ago. And I was weak, and I smoked over 9/11. But whatever the reason, the news does slow you down a bit.
Jennings was deeply affected by the country's outpouring of support, saying in an email to viewers, Thousands of you have spoiled me rotten with your attention in the last couple of weeks.
And I hope it goes without saying that a journalist who doesn't value deeply the audience's loyalty should be in another line of work.
If Peter Jennings could have survived on the support and love of his colleagues across the country and the thousands of well-wishers alone, he'd be with us still. He and his family remain in the prayers of those of us left behind, those in awe of a career and a life so brilliant and so full.
There is no one absolutely essential truth for all people. And that every time I look at a coin, I'm instinctively want to look at the other side.